Okay, so let's start our first post-decision camp session. And today, Carole-Ann from SparklingLogic will kindly share with us best practices for decision model testing. And we can wait probably 1 more minute, Carole-Ann, before you start to let people join. And we have this session also live streaming on YouTube, DecisionCAMP channel. And Carole-Ann,
Okay.
take over.
Okay, well, let's get started. While everybody's joining, I can just introduce the topic. Regression testing is something that we feel very strongly about because it really helps improving the quality of the decisions. You know, as always, I like to have practical best practices that I can share. Obviously, we'd love it if you're using SparklingLogic Smart, but those best practices really apply across the board. Not all the tools will have all the same functionalities, but the methodology and the approach, I think, is very generic, regardless of the technology that you're using. So hopefully, whether you have picked a tool or you don't, or you haven't yet, you know, wherever you are at, hopefully there will be some nuggets of information that will be useful in this presentation. So let me jump into it. Obviously, if you're interested in DecisionCAMP, if you have decided to participate, we assume that you have an interest in automating decisions. That's the purpose of these technologies, to be able to document and harvest your business rules requirements, and then to implement them and deploy them. So that's a great first step. What we believe is that you need to take the second step as well to automate your testing, to be able to make sure that those decisions are actually doing what you want them to do. I'm going to go quickly on the motivation. Obviously, you want to reduce the cost of doing this testing. You don't want to have resources available for days on end doing testing manually. You want to reduce the time to market. So the faster and the more you can automate those regression tests for the decisions. I'm not talking about
the math equals, right?
I'm not talking about regression testing across the board for the software solution, but really just for the decisions that will allow you to improve the quality of those decisions. So, I mean, I have been quite surprised. We do a lot of migration projects. So I see projects or teams that have been using decision management for years, and yet it's not common practice for every project to have those regression testing capabilities already in place. So that's why I felt it was an interesting topic to cover as part of DecisionCAMP. So let me take a step back into the basics of regression testing and what I mean by that. And sometimes I call it QA testing. To me, that's the same thing. The idea is that we want to validate that the business rules are implemented per the requirements, that they actually do what they are supposed to do. And you know, ideally, you do have an expected outcome, and you can make sure that each one of the test cases that you have is matching your expected outcome. If they match, then you pass, and if everything matches, you're good to go, and they can go into production. If they don't, then there may be some work to fix things, and we'll see what that means. So part of the testing life cycle, I think this is a loop, but there is a loop within the loop. So on one end, let me actually split our loop in half, starting with making the decision that you want to automate, picking the tool, the technology that will be used, putting in place the test planning, the processes. All of that is typically more of a one-off solution. Ideally, it's part of your decision management system. If not, it might be additional tooling that you want to consider. But what I want to focus on is what is on the other side of the divide, the process of actually testing and being efficient at performing this regression testing. So creating your test cases, executing your test, and reviewing the results, and obviously fixing as part of that, and then keep doing it every time there are some changes, every time you need to go through a release of your decisions. So your test case, that's where we need to start at. In the best case scenario, those test cases already exist. That is often the case for a modernization project. If the project already existed and didn't have to exist in a decision management system, it could be your old COBOL system if there are still some out there that need to be modernized. Those transactions already exist. They may be in a different format. They may not follow exactly the same structure as the new transactions. But hopefully there is a great deal of historical transactions you can harvest, maybe manipulate, and bring back into the new environment. For a greenfield project, they may not exist. So it's not always the case that you will have test cases available readily. We've seen projects where people are just creating those using tooling. There are some great tools that exist to generate all of the possible transaction. The key thing, though, is that those transactions need to tell you what's the expected outcome. So if you generate 1 million or 1 billion transaction, that's going to help with testing that the rules perform gracefully, but you still need to document what is the expected outcome. So going from best case to worst case scenario, best case, you have this historical data and the expected outcome. Second best is that you have the historical data, but you don't have the expected outcome. And if you don't, especially for those greenfield projects, you might have to go back to the documentation put together by the business, and hopefully they contain some test cases to illustrate the requirements. And really the worst case is that they don't, and you have to create everything from scratch. So the data structure typically will contain your transaction. So your transaction is your normal payload for your project. It's your input, and then it will have the output that goes back to the system. For QA testing, for regression testing, what you want to do is to expand on that and add 2 additional sections to your transaction. One, and those 2 obviously don't exist in the actual decision project or decision service that will be deployed. The first one is the expected outcome. So we really need to know what are all the decision details that need to be matched in order to state that your business rules are proper. And a QA indicator section, and the naming can be whatever you want, but a section where you can keep track of what is matching, what is not matching, and maybe a little bit more. In the case of modernization, what we've seen also slightly different. Instead of being the expected outcome, it would be the full all transaction. It might be the full all transaction that is available in the system, and that will allow you to create actually the new transaction, so following the new data structure before you run. This is helpful for those cases where you do have the data, but the data is not structured the same way that it was. As part of our QA indicators, you want to know that QA passed overall, but you may want to go to another level of granularity and looking at each decision attribute one at a time. Is the status okay? Is the premium calculation okay? what is the difference between the two, and you want to be able to compare that automatically so that you don't have to go back and forth between the old payload and the new payload, or the payload and the expected outcome, making sure that everything is matching. So the more you can have those indicators calculated automatically, whether it's a formula like I have here, or computation, what we call a computation, or whether you are using business rules to make these assessments, you want that to be automatically done. So let me take a quick break into a project to show you how that would work. So I'm not gonna go, we don't have time for me to go over the project itself and what rules are currently in the system, but I have an auto insurance project. I can see what's the decision outcome for each one of the transactions. I can improve that by adding the expected outcome. So I have a spreadsheet that contains all of those transactions, but here in yellow, I've added what I expect as the premium, the tier, and the status that needs to be made. So I'm gonna go and quickly update the structure to add the decision outcome. Obviously, I could do that by hand, but I'm lazy, so I'm gonna update this spreadsheet by, the data structure by importing the spreadsheet. So I'm gonna drag and drop it in here, and that's gonna add all of the fields for the expected outcome that we just saw. And I'm gonna populate our documents with the same data. So I'm gonna do one and then the other. And there you go. So now when I go back to our project, I should be able to see, let me go back, our expected outcome, and it has all of the values that are needed. So this is the extra that was not in the initial project. I'm gonna add an additional section for our QA indicators, like we mentioned earlier. And I'm gonna add, let me expand so that I can add fields. So I will have a flag to say whether or not QA passed, and I can add a formula in here. And I can decide that maybe the status is the only thing I care about, or I can say that I want to match more than just the status. So it could be status is the same as the expected status, and I would like the tier to be matching as well. So I will have that one as well. And maybe the third one is our premium. And I will make that a Boolean. The nice thing is that that will allow me to get the feedback right away as to whether or not this is passed. I could create the same fields, but instead of being all of QA, maybe did the status pass. So status passed, and that will be exactly the same thing, but this one only cares about status. And I could have another one. I can keep adding as many of those attributes as we need. Let's say we want the premium passed. And this one will be just the first step. So you can add as many attributes as, or as many indicators as you want into this QA indication to help you identify what is working, what is not working. Let me jump back to the slides real quick, trying to be mindful of time. So the next step is to run and check that your flags passed or failed. So let's go in here. Oops, where's my project? Is here. So now we can, let me hide that so that we can see our indicators. I can simply run and it will tell me that this one passed in terms of the status. So I can see what is expected is approved and the actual was approved, but there was a discrepancy between the premiums. So I did not pass the premium, and as a result, I didn't pass the specific transaction. The QA test overall for this specific transaction did not pass. I can go across all of the documents and look for each one of them, what passed, what didn't pass. But what I would prefer to do is to just add, let me add a page here for QA. I'm gonna rename it in our dashboard so that I can get the information in aggregation instead of looking at them one by one. So I can pick, let me get out of modify form. I can just drag and drop our QA passed, and I can see that overall 31 of our 100 transactions did not. If I want to have the breakdown as to, oops, how many passed the QA, I can simply, well, if my mouse cooperates with me, it doesn't want to cooperate. I have problems with my mouse today. So I can just add it manually instead of trying to drag and drop. So I can see what's the breakdown for each one of them. Let me add a report for this one as well. We can see all 3 reports on this end to see what is the breakdown, how many passed because of status, because of premium, and so on.
Oh.
I hope it's not a comment on the presentation. So you can build your own dashboard just by looking at those test cases in aggregation, and that can really accelerate your process. You can also add some business rules to analyze the differences. You can compute automatically what is the difference between the old premium and the new premium as a dollar number. You can just have right there information about the statuses. You don't have to go and scroll back and forth and look at the data. Obviously, all the data is here and it's readily available, but the more you can analyze ahead of time what are the discrepancies, the faster you will be at performing your whole QA system. It can give you a lot of indications. We've done some projects where those QA rules are actually fairly sophisticated so that we can save a lot of time analyzing by hand manually what are the differences. So once we know that we've got 31 of our test cases failing and only 3 of them because of status and things like that, we can start filtering and zero in on the on what are those bad test cases so that we can be more focused, more effective. The reason I think it's really important to be able to have these filtering capabilities is that it focuses your attention on the transactions that are incorrect, and you don't have to go one by one through your 100 transactions. I do a ton of filtering in Smarts, as this is obviously the decision management system I use. So you can create your filters to say, show me only those that failed the premium test, show me only those that failed the status. So let me create real quick some of those document group filters. Maybe I'll do just one of them. Let's say I want to look at those that failed the status. Let me call it a better name, status failed. And the condition will be if the status is, status passed, oops, is false. So if I did not pass the status, then I failed it, obviously. So when I make this filter active, you can see here at the top, let me clear it. we have 100 transactions to begin with. When I make it active, we go down to the 3, and we can look at just those 3 that are missing the final decision. So this one is declined, but it used to be approved. And because it's only 3 of them, I can just go one by one and look at them. I can also apply this filter to the dashboard so that it gives me the indication. So obviously this is just what failed and what succeeded. But if I look at the actual decisions and the tiers and the total premium, all the final outcome, I might find some more information that is relevant. This one, for example, is referred because of too many cars. I can go into the too many cars rule and see why it's failing. So I might need to go and review the documentation for my business rules requirements, and I would see that it's not 3, but it's supposed to be 4. And now if I execute those rules, going back to the dashboard, I might end up with a different distribution. So you can see that one of them got fixed and I'm making progress. I only have 2 of them left that have the wrong decision overall into the system. And you will keep going iteratively until you get to fix all of them. So fairly straightforward process to go and solve your problems. So first of all, it's identifying the problems and then going across all of your reports and the information to be able to fix the rules. Obviously, the requirements will be useful as well. But being able to massage the information to say what's the premium difference, I can see a ton of them have a $25 difference. So it seems to be just a difference in the pricing that we have in our rules, and that gives me already a bit of information without having to review all of the rules that are in the system. So the last step is really to fix those test cases and the rules you want to pass everything. And there are 3 ways you can fix them. You know, intuitively, I think people think about fixing the rule if the rules don't pass the test, then the rule is wrong. But that's not always the case. The first option is obviously to fix the rule, and that's what we just did with the too many cars rule. But we may need to fix the test cases. Maybe those test cases were old and now we are adding more states in which we're doing business, or we're changing our pricing. So obviously all of our premium calculations are obsolete and I need to update them with a new pricing so that the new rules that are correct are going to pass the test. And one that is less intuitive is fixing the comparison. And that's especially true, I think, when you're dealing with a modernization project and you're dealing with a data structure that is different. It's possible that the precision is slightly off for any reason between your calculations. So instead of being an exact comparison, you may want to say, I want to make sure those 2 numbers match up to the 6 digits after the decimal point. Or I want to check the status, but I don't care whether it's uppercase, lowercase, or I do. So it's really up to you to figure out how strict you want to be, and maybe being within 5% is good enough. So it's up to you to specify what it means to succeed in your QA test. So I'm not going to go through fixing all of the problems in this project, but I just wanted to conclude this overview of regression testing applied to decision management with some best practices. I think that it's definitely a great value over time to maintain a library of test cases with your expected outcome. If you can have this, set of hopefully not just 100, but maybe more, thousands or even, millions or billions of transactions that have this expected outcome, then you can really improve the quality of your decisions. Each time you make a change to your business rules, you can run the entire battery of tests, and within seconds or minutes, you're going to get your reports telling you if everything is okay as it used to be, or what has been impacted, and was it normal that it was impacted. Looking at the bigger picture, this is definitely something I highly recommend on every project, especially when that data is available. If not, just start building this library. But don't think that doing the QA testing is enough necessarily. I would not rely exclusively on those individual checks transaction by transaction, but look at your KPIs as well in aggregation. It might be correct that this specific transaction is supposed to be declined now, but if your decline rate goes to 60%, is probably not what you intended to do. There might be something missing in your business rules, and maybe some clarifications to have with the business. So being able to expand beyond just a regression test, but leveraging more of those dashboards to help you look more holistically at your business rules is really what's going to help you in the long run. So that's the core presentation, and I'm going to let Jacob help me with QA testing, sorry, Q&A.
Okay, thank you very much, Carole-Ann. And I want to unmute everybody. If you want to ask questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask question. Any questions so far? Okay, let me ask you a question. I understand from your presentation, you demonstrated everything inside one decision model, right? Like in this case, what if we make changes not only in rules, let's say in some Java objects that used across multiple decision models, and they were changed, and maybe they already spoiled something it's okay with one model, but they spoiled something in another model. How do you do regression across multiple decision models?
So you definitely can do that, and that is very typical, because a full decision, let's say you're approving a mortgage or a credit card, whatever it might be, it's probably not just a one decision. It's probably a number of decisions that happen before you order some reports, after you get those reports from a credit bureau or some other data source. So typically things are, or decisions can be more complex than that. Within your decision flow, you can organize your decision testing to go and execute your pre-bureau rules, for example. Then you can simulate acquiring the data, or expect that your data transformation created those reports already in the payload, and then you can execute the post-bureau rules. Compose, this higher level process for QA testing that will go across different decisions. The one thing that I really don't focus on, and that I think is probably the responsibility of more of a software developer tooling, is doing the end-to-end testing, including the data access, including whatever is happening on the back end. I think this is typically instrumentation that is used as part of your you know, whether it's Java.NET or you know, REST services. So it's at a lower level.
Okay, what I mean, let's suppose what our customers, and I can see in different tools, the same problems when you install new versions of somebody else tools, or let's say SparklingLogic, you provide new versions and you have customers and they want to do regression testing for multiple decision models. And so usually you can list all these models and some configuration files. Do you have such facilities or do you recommend them?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I would prefer if everything was in Smarts personally.
Okay.
But yeah, if there is a decision model that needs to be invoked in between that comes from open rules, as long as we have a protocol to be able to invoke it, a way to make a call to it, we can make this external call to open rules and have that one step in the middle or anywhere in the flow.
Okay, I see Gediminas has a question. Gediminas, can you ask?
Yes, good day. Many thanks for the presentation. So my question is following. Have you observed an optimal number of test cases per decision service? Let's put it that way. What we have observed on our side is that neither extreme of having thousands of test cases nor having, let's say, 5 test cases is a good number. So what is your experience with this?
So I think it's very difficult to give a number because it depends on the complexity of your business rules. An eligibility service, for example, is probably going to look at 50 states. You want to multiply that by maybe different age groups and some other criteria, but it's going to be fairly limited because you're not looking at too many attributes to decide someone is eligible. If you're doing a full underwriting service, then you will have a lot more combinations of your DMV information, your credit bureau information, you know, X, Y, and Z that need to be tested. So I think it's more of a factor of the complexity of the decision service. I've seen some projects where, you know, we ended up with maybe 100 test cases and that exercised what we needed, so that was fine. But typically I would agree that if you can be in the thousands, that would be much better.
Would it be okay to assume that number of test cases usually more than number of rules they validate?
Yeah, it's because typically you want to create the matrix, the products of all of those different options, even though they may not, you know, some of them may not exist in real life. When you're dealing with historical transactions, obviously all of those are realistic combinations. But when you or if you don't have that and you have to produce them using a tool that generates the data, typically would be a matrix, so it will tend to be much bigger than the actual number of rules.
Good, we have the same experience. Anybody else wants to ask questions?
Yeah, this is Baljit. Thanks, Carol, for the nice presentation. I would like to comment on the number of test cases question that was asked. In my experience, the number of test cases should be related with the coverage needed, like, you know, what Carol said. As long as your test cases cover all the rules, that should be good. We don't want to have too many test cases, and you spend a lot of time, you know, creating thousands of test cases. Sometimes thousands of test cases are needed, depending upon how many rules you have, and then various combinations of conditions you want to test. So that's where I would say, and I personally have seen thousands of test cases for testing several rules projects. So it's not out of ordinary to see. My other comment, actually question is to Carol is, when you have thousands of test cases, how do you manage those test cases? And as we're in the development phase, sometimes the document model keeps changing. And how do you go about editing those test cases to adjust to the modified document model in the
Good
early phases?
question.
So, and I think that's back to the slide I had with whether it's modernization or not. Um, typically, those test cases can be created as we go. The object model tends to be, fairly stable. There are some changes here and there that happen over time, but typically the object model at the beginning of the project and the end of the project is not going to be completely different. Hopefully for you, it's not going to be completely different. There may be some changes in the middle, but they may not be critical for your end decision. Where I've seen the most modifications are in those modernization projects where the starting point has nothing to do with a new transaction that you're going to have in the system. The way people were putting together their COBOL buffers back then has nothing to do with object modeling, obviously. And so there could be very significant differences between the two. But in those cases, we use business rules to translate and say everything that is in here, translate this way into this data. And my experience is that we didn't have to create millions of rules to do that. Typically, it ends up being, maybe a dozen or two business rules to do the or even less, to do the data transformation from the old structure to the new structure. But this is, it's definitely an issue when you need to refactor your payload for whatever system. This is something that you hope will not happen.
Yeah.
Okay, Gary Hallmark has very interesting question about coverage analysis. Gary, you want to be more specific? Gary? Okay, he wrote, you can read his question here, that how you can do coverage analysis, for example, to find the rules that never fire.
Yeah, so a lot of the decision management systems have verification tools that can tell you that because of the syntax, because of the actual body of the rule, some rules have a contradiction, and that's why they will never happen. And we do too, but we're not the only ones to have those kind of checks. So it's fairly common to have that, and that's one category of coverage analysis. We do produce also a map for each one of the transactions as to what are the rules that execute, but we can create a map to tell you across the entire document group what are the rules that were exercised and how many times were they exercised. Without going to the report, I can just show you here in the decision. Let me remove the filter so that we go back to our 100 transactions. The heat map you see behind the names of each one of the rules is telling you how many times they apply to the document group. And if, let's see, I don't know if I have a rule that never applies. I don't have one in the current system, but if I had a rule that never applied, it would not have a heat map. So it would be easy to spot that, at least given this series of test cases, this rule was never executed. So there are different reports that we have at least in Smarts, to be able to give you this information that some rules apply a lot, some don't apply at all. the length of the heat map will tell you that new driver applies a lot in this specific case. I have 23 of my drivers that have zero experience, or very close to zero experience driving.
Yeah, that's a very nice solution. In general, probably verification and validation very related with regression testing.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a very practical topics. And do we have any other questions? Okay, probably this was a good practical session, and our time is 40 minutes exactly. That's great. And Carole-Ann, on behalf of all attendees, I want to thank you for a nice practical presentation.
You're welcome. Thank you all for spending the time. It's always a pleasure interacting, and love the questions.
And then our next presentation will be in 1 month, and the expected presenter would be Dan Selman. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
And
Have a fantastic day.
Thank you.
you can find recordings on the DecisionCAMP YouTube channels. Bye.
Bye.